Hello and welcome back to another video of the Bible Basics program. Today, what we want to talk about is a brief introduction to the Bible so that way our readers can have a general bird's eye view of what the Bible is all about. Now, if you get any one of your standard Bibles, there'll be about 2,000 pages, and that's a lot of material for anybody to sift through at any time. And so what we want to do today is to take a brief overview and give you a handle on how to navigate your Bible. Now when you open up your Bible, you'll see the table of contents. And when you get to that table of contents, you'll note that there are two main divisions of the Bible: the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this actually comes from a Greek word that should actually be translated as covenant instead of testament, but because that's how it was done originally in the King James in 1611, then that stuck, and so that's why we have the Old and New Testament. So there are five main divisions in the Old Testament, and the first division are called the books of law, or the Torah, and these are the books that are written by Moses, and it consists of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These are the books of law, and these cover the period from creation until the children of Israel were in the plains of Moab outside outside Canaan's eastern border. And the next major division is the 12 books of history. And these books are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, the 2 books of Samuel, the 2 books of Kings, the 2 books of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Now, in the original Hebrew scrolls, the book of Ruth was appended to the book of Judges. 1st and 2nd Samuel were together, as was Kings and Chronicles. But the English edition reflects the changes that were made in the Greek translation of the Old Testament rather than following the Hebrew original. And so that's why we have 12 books of history, whereas the Hebrew original has fewer. And so the period of history covers from the conquest of Canaan that was done by Joshua, who was Moses' attendant that took over the leadership of the nation of Israel at God's direction after Moses died, all the way through the 400 years of Judges, through the institution of the kingship by Samuel at God's direction, the period of the United Kingdom of Israel under the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon, to the point where after Solomon was dead in 1 Kings, that his son did not listen to the advice of the old men, and so 10 tribes left the rule of David's house and became the nation of Israel that fell away into idolatry. Now, the 10 tribes were carried away into idolatry by the Assyrian nation in 722 BC. Now, the nation of Judah saw this, and the nation of Judah consisted of the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and the Levitical priests, and the remnant of the other 10 tribes that rejected the idolatry of northern Israel, but they got involved in their own idolatry and fell away and were taken into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar, finally in the period from 606 BC to 586 BC. And then the Jews spent 70 years in captivity until King Cyrus of Persia restored the Jews to Jerusalem, which is covered in Ezra and in Nehemiah. And of course, the book of Esther takes place in that 70-year period in exile. So that covers the second major period of the Old Testament, and that actually brings us up to the end of the historical period. So finally, when that's all done, we've jumped in the timeline basically from 1440 BC to 436 BC, and so then there's the period of intertestamental silence that is covered by the Maccabees and other external writings. But now we have to go back, and we've got the works of poetry. There's 5 books of poetry consisting of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. The book of Job was written early, and in a chronological Bible will usually be placed or somewhere around Genesis 10 or Genesis 11, but that it was one of the earliest actual texts that was written. And the Psalms is a collection of 150 poems that were written by a variety of people. We know that 75 of them, or approximately one half, were written by King David. And then the rest were written by a variety of people from Moses until the return of the Jews from captivity. So if you were reading in a chronological Bible, one feature that may present itself is a psalm would be placed in its historical context, so you can see what was really going on at that time. And then the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes were written by the son of King David named Solomon, and so that would appear along with the historical narrative in 1 Kings chapters 1 through 9. And then the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, there's those 3 books, and there's some conjecture that the Song of Solomon actually was written first, and that Proverbs was an ongoing work by Solomon, and Ecclesiastes was written perhaps from the younger to the middle part of his reign before he fell into idolatry. And so that covers the 5 books of poetry. Then next we have the major prophets, and that Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Now, the book of Lamentations in the original Hebrew was originally appended to the book of Jeremiah, since he wrote both of them. And so that Isaiah and Jeremiah were written before the captivity, and Lamentations and Ezekiel were written during the captivity and afterward, and the book of Daniel occurs when the first group of Jewish exiles was taken into captivity in 606 BC through the 70 years of Daniel's lifetime that he records, since Daniel indicates that he served in the first year of Cyrus. And so it covers that 70-year period. Now the minor prophets are more difficult to date, but each one can be dated through the research and study. And so the minor prophets appear all throughout the historical narrative. And we'll probably do a more detailed study on that when we do a lengthy introduction to the minor prophets. But there's 12 minor prophets. This covers the book Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And so that covers all the books of the Old Testament, from the creation of man to the restoration of the Jews by King Cyrus, and actually carries the history through to the time of Darius and all the way through the construction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So then, in the record, there's a 400-year period of silence where nothing occurred, and then Jesus is born in approximately around 4 BC, according to our calendar. And the histories tell us that Jesus was born approximately 749 years from the founding of Rome. And so the New Testament consists of 27 books, and it has 4 major sections. The first section is Gospels, and this contains 4 books that were written by Matthew the tax collector, by John Mark, by Luke the physician, and by John, the son of Zebedee, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story of Jesus' life following a similar pattern, but that does not mean that they necessarily took from one another. And the Gospel of John was written much later and focuses on 7 miracles that Jesus did in order to especially make the case that Jesus is the Messiah of Jewish expectation. And so the Gospels basically cover the birth of Jesus and John the Immerser, and the early life of these 2 men, and the ministry of John briefly, and the ministry of Jesus that covered basically 3 to 3.5 years, depending upon the dating, and concludes with the Passion Week, which is the last week that Jesus had in Jerusalem, his trial before the Jews, his trial before the Romans, and his crucifixion, and the account of his resurrection. So we have one book of history that is the book of Acts, and the book of Acts is actually the second part of Luke's work. That Luke and Acts are actually 2 parts of one overall arching work that he wrote to a Roman nobleman named Theophilus, and so these comprise a complete story. And in the book of Acts, we receive the account of Jesus ascending into heaven after giving a final charge to his apostles, and his commission to them to teach the gospel in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And that general outline that you see in the book of Acts, the first half, Acts 1 through 12, covers mainly the work of Peter, and Acts 13 through 28 covers mainly the work of Paul and his traveling companions. And so that then that covers the historical books that document the spread of Christianity throughout the entire known Roman world. The next major section are the letters, and most of these are written by Paul, but not all. And this covers 21 books of the New Testament. And so this is comprised of Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon are what is known as the Pauline corpus, those that are written by Paul definitely. Then we have the general letters that consist of 5 volumes that are generally written to Christians spread throughout the Roman world rather than those that are written to a specific congregation. Now, there are some that argue that Paul wrote the letter to the Hebrews, and others argue that he did not, and we're not going to get into that question. But there's the general letter to the Hebrews, and then there's James' general letter on practical Christianity, and then, of course, First and Second Peter, written by Simon Peter, then we have First and Second, Third John, and Jude. And so we have these general letters, and that comprises the letter section, or the epistolary section of the New Testament. And the focus of these letters is to tell us how we are to live as Christians. Now the final section, the last of the 5 sections, is a prophetic book, and this is the book of Revelation that is also written by John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, that wrote the Gospel of John, and also wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John that we've talked about briefly. And the Revelation was written around the year AD 90 to 95. This is the conservative date, and that's what we want to go with. And the letter is a symbolic one full of signs and symbols that discusses the things that must shortly take place, especially concerning the 7 churches of Asia and the coming persecution that Christians were going to face overall. And despite the particular historical interpretation of particular signs and symbols, the general message of the book of Revelation is that Satan has always opposed God's people, and that Satan tried to destroy Jesus and was unsuccessful, and therefore Satan turns his wrath on the church and tries to use the world to stamp out the church in every way that he can, but that God, through his providence, and Jesus, through his power, prevents this from occurring and assures the victory of the church. And then we have the scene of the last consummation, the final judgment, where all accounts are settled and Satan's doom is brought upon him, and the righteous are ushered into their eternal reward, and the wicked are ushered into their eternal punishment, and therefore all the matters of this creation are finally brought to a conclusion. And so that is the content of the book of Revelation, and that also covers the New Testament as a whole in this major section. So, as you can see in our brief survey of the Bible, that we have gone from creation to the second coming of Christ, and we've briefly traced the overarching narrative and the logical development of the biblical story. And so this is the framework we always need to have in mind, that the Old Testament looks forward to the cross and the New Testament looks back to the cross. The preacher used to say that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, but the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. So we hope that this brief introduction to the books of the Bible and their purpose and how they fit together has been helpful to you, and that it will be encouraging to you, and that as you get a grip and a handle on these things, that when you look at your table of contents in your Bible, that you'll be able to remember these associations, and it'll help you whenever you're reading your Bible to always have that overarching narrative in place. And so what we want to encourage you to do is a couple things. Number one, watch this video again. This is a lot of information for people to take in all at once, and so we want to make sure that you're taking this information in and not just watching it but learning it. And then you'll want to take a sheet of notebook paper and write down the different divisions of the book in the Old and New Testament, and make it a goal to memorize these. If you can't memorize all the books in sequence in like 1 week, try doing one section at a time. Like, make it a goal, say, this week I'm going to memorize the books of law, or I'm going to memorize the epistles, or I'm going to memorize the names of the Gospels. So then that way you'll get familiar with where things are in the Bible, and then you can practice navigating different books and getting the feel for how to navigate if you don't have an electronic Bible to hand. So that's the first thing. Second, we want to encourage you to read your Bible daily so that you can start learning and memorizing and internalizing it. And thirdly, we want to encourage you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to share it with other people that you meet that are around you, so then that way they can gain access to this knowledge too. And then you also want to get to the point where you can share this knowledge with other people when they ask you. So in the meantime, until we come back with another video, we want to encourage you that, like the Bereans in Acts chapter 17, verse 11, the book of Acts, New Testament, book of history, look back to the cross, that Acts 17:11, be like those Bereans that didn't just take Paul's word for it, but examine the scriptures daily to see whether these things are so. So be sure to catch us next time on this next edition of Bible Basics.